Chapter 1. Foundations. Roger Sherman stood in his workshop, the scent of cedar and varnish filling the air as he ran his weathered hands across the mahogany dining table he'd been restoring. At 62, his shoulders still carried the breadth of the construction foreman he'd been for 30 years, though silver now streaked his dark hair. The workshop occupied the entire basement of the Sherman family home, a three-story Victorian he'd built with his own hands in 1985. "Roger, dinner's ready." Lillian's voice drifted down from the kitchen above. Even after 38 years of marriage, her voice still carried the same warmth that had first caught his attention at a county fair in 1984. He climbed the stairs, emerging into the kitchen where Lillian was setting the table. At 59, she remained beautiful, though worry lines had deepened around her green eyes in recent months. Their son Eric's behavior had been weighing on both of them. "Where's Eric?" Roger asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Out with those developer friends again," Lillian sighed. "Roger, I'm worried. He's been asking strange questions about the house lately. Property values, mortgage details, your will." Roger had noticed too. Eric, 28 and perpetually unemployed despite his business degree, had been circling the family home like a vulture. The house sat on 12 acres of prime real estate just outside Portland, Oregon, worth nearly $4 million in the current market. "Don't worry, Lil," Roger said, pulling her close. "I've been preparing for this longer than you know." What Lillian didn't know was that Roger had spent the last 2 years quietly setting up a complex web of legal protections around their property. His old friend Stephen Montgomery, the best real estate attorney in the state, had helped him create what Stephen called the most bulletproof property trap I've ever seen. The front door slammed, and Eric walked in, his designer clothes and expensive watch a stark contrast to his parents' modest appearance. At 6'2", with their family's characteristic dark hair, Eric could have been handsome if not for the permanent sneer that seemed etched on his face. "Family dinner again," Eric said mockingly. "How quaint." "Sit down, son," Roger said calmly. "Your mother made your favorite." Eric grudgingly took his seat, immediately pulling out his phone. "Actually, I need to talk to you both about something important. I've been thinking about this old house. It's just sitting here, taking up valuable space. We could all be rich if we..." "If we what?" Roger interrupted, his voice steady but dangerous. "Sell it. There are developers who'd pay top dollar for this land. We could each take our share in..." "Our share?" Lillian's fork clattered against her plate. "Eric, this is our home. Your father built every room with his own hands." Eric's laugh was cold. "It's just a pile of wood, Mom. Wood and cinnamon don't pay bills." Roger studied his son's face, seeing the greed that had replaced any trace of the boy he'd once taught to ride a bike in the very driveway Eric now wanted to sell. "The house isn't for sale, Eric. It never will be." "We'll see about that," Eric muttered, returning to his phone. Later that night, as Lillian slept beside him, Roger stared at the ceiling of the master bedroom he'd framed himself. Tomorrow, he would make a call to Stephen Montgomery. It was time to activate the final phase of his plan. He'd built this house to be his family's legacy. If Eric wanted to destroy that legacy, Roger would make sure his son learned exactly what happened to those who betrayed family trust. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 3 weeks later, Eric Sherman sat across from Tony Bell, a slick developer whose reputation for bending rules was well known in Portland's real estate circles. Bell's office overlooked the city skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting Eric's hungry expression. "The property is perfect," Bell said, sliding glossy architectural renderings across his mahogany desk. 12 acres that close to downtown? We're talking about a luxury housing development that could net us all serious money." Eric leaned forward, studying the plans that showed his childhood home replaced by a maze of McMansions. "My parents are being stubborn about it. My dad's got some sentimental attachment." "Sentiment doesn't pay for retirement homes," Bell laughed. "Look, Eric, I've dealt with families like yours before. Sometimes the older generation needs a little encouragement to see reason." "What kind of encouragement?" Bell's smile was predatory. "Let me worry about that. You just need to give me legal access to make an offer. Once we start the process, momentum has a way of carrying things forward." What Eric didn't know was that Roger had been tracking every one of these meetings. Stephen Montgomery's investigator had been documenting Bell's questionable business practices for months, building a file that would eventually become very useful. Meanwhile, Roger continued his daily routine, working in his shop, tending to Lillian, and preparing. He'd already transferred the property into a complex trust structure that made Eric's plans legally impossible, but his son didn't need to know that yet. That evening, Eric came home late, reeking of expensive whiskey and cheap cologne. He found Roger reading in the living room, the same chair where Roger had once read bedtime stories to a much different version of this man. "Dad, we need to talk seriously about this house situation," Eric slurred slightly. Roger looked up from his book, a biography of Andrew Carnegie that seemed fitting given the circumstances. "I'm listening. I've been talking to some people. Smart people. They say we're sitting on a gold mine here, and it's selfish to keep it locked up in sentiment. Smart people like Tony Bell." Eric's face went pale. "How did you? I know everything that happens in this town, son, including Bell's 3 bankruptcy filings and his pending lawsuit for fraudulent dealing." Roger's voice remained calm, but his eyes had turned steel gray. "I also know about the kickbacks he's promised you. You're having me followed?" Eric's voice cracked with indignation. "I'm protecting my family's interests, something you seem to have forgotten how to do." Eric stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor Roger had laid by hand. "This is my inheritance too. I have rights. You have the rights I choose to give you," Roger said quietly. "And those rights don't include destroying everything I've built." "We'll see about that, old man." After Eric stormed out, Roger made 2 phone calls. The first was to Stephen Montgomery, confirming that all the legal mechanisms were in place. The second was to his old construction crew foreman, Jake Rogers, who still had connections throughout the city's building and demolition companies. "Jake, I need you to keep an ear out for any permits filed on my property address," Roger said. "You expecting trouble, boss? I'm expecting my son to make the biggest mistake of his life. And when he does, I want to be ready." Roger hung up and returned to his book, but his mind was already several moves ahead in the chess game Eric didn't even know he was playing. Chapter 3. The First Wall Falls. The morning of April 15th started like any other, with Roger sipping coffee in his kitchen and watching the sunrise paint the mountains orange. Lillian had gone to visit her sister for the week, unaware of the storm that was about to break. At exactly 9:30 a.m., Eric's red Mustang roared up the driveway, followed by 3 county vehicles and a massive bulldozer. Roger watched from his kitchen window as his son emerged from the car with a triumphant grin, waving official-looking documents. Tony Bell stepped out of a black SUV, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Behind them came Vernon Donaldson, a corrupt county inspector Roger had been tracking for months, and Wesley Flynn, a demolition foreman known for asking few questions about the legality of his jobs. Roger calmly walked outside, carrying a folding lawn chair, which he set up on the front lawn with a clear view of his house. He sat down and waited. Eric approached him, practically bouncing with excitement. "Dad, I try to do this the easy way, but you force my hand. I've got court orders here declaring you mentally incompetent to manage the property. Tony's company is now the legal owner, and we're demolishing this old pile of wood today." Roger pulled out his phone and speed dialed a number. "Stephen? It's time." "Dad, what are you doing?" Eric's confidence wavered slightly. "I'm making a call," Roger said calmly. Then louder, "You can start whenever you're ready, Wesley." The bulldozer roared to life, and Wesley Flynn positioned it against the eastern wall of the house, the wall that contained Roger's workshop. The machine's blade bit into the wooden siding, and boards splintered and fell. At that exact moment, Eric's phone rang. "Mr. Sherman?" The voice was sharp, professional, and audibly panicked even from Roger's position. "This is Patricia Hines from Montgomery and Associates. You need to stop that demolition immediately." "Who is this?" Eric put the call on speaker, his face growing pale. "I'm the attorney representing the actual legal owner of that property. What you've just done constitutes destruction of protected historical property, violation of a federal conservation easement, and about 6 other felonies. You're looking at a minimum $5 million penalty and 20 years in federal prison." Tony Bell grabbed the phone. "This is Tony Bell of Bell Development. We have all the proper permits and court orders. Mr. Bell, those court orders were obtained through fraudulent documentation. My client's property was placed in an irrevocable trust 2 years ago, with specific federal protections that make any sale or demolition illegal without trust board approval. Eric Sherman has no legal authority to sell this property. Roger stood up from his lawn chair, his calm demeanor never breaking. The property is protected under the Historical Preservation Act as an example of 1980s custom residential construction. It's also under a conservation easement that prevents any development of the surrounding 12 acres. Every document Eric filed to get those court orders was based on fraudulent claims of ownership. Eric's face had gone from pale to green. That's impossible. I'm your son. I inherit. You inherit what the trust allows you to inherit, Roger said, which, as of today, is exactly nothing. Vernon Donaldson, the corrupt inspector, tried to quietly slip back to his car, but found his way blocked by 2 men in federal badges. Jake Rogers emerged from behind the house with them, grinning. FBI, one of the agents announced. Vernon Donaldson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, accepting bribes, and falsifying official documents. Wesley Flynn had shut off the bulldozer and was backing away from the scene, but Jake's construction crew emerged from the tree line to surround the demolition equipment. Eric, Patricia Hines' voice continued from the phone. You need to understand the full scope of your situation. In addition to the federal charges, you've triggered penalty clauses in the trust that make you liable for all damages, legal fees, and restoration costs. You're looking at personal bankruptcy, even if you avoid prison time. Tony Bell tried to run, but found himself face-to-face with Stephen Montgomery himself, who had just arrived with a briefcase full of documentation. Mr. Bell, Stephen said pleasantly, I believe you owe my client about $3 million in damages for this little stunt. Plus, of course, the criminal charges that are being filed as we speak. Roger looked at his son, who had collapsed into a crouch next to his Mustang, the weight of his situation finally sinking in. Eric, I gave you every chance to choose family over greed. You chose greed. Dad, please. Eric's voice cracked. I didn't know. I thought. You thought you could steal my life's work and sell it for cash. Roger's voice carried 30 years of disappointment. You thought wrong. As the FBI agents led Vernon Donaldson away in handcuffs, and Wesley Flynn tried to explain to police why he'd started demolition without proper permits, Roger surveyed the minor damage to his house's eastern wall. It would take maybe a weekend to repair. But repairing his relationship with his son? That would take a lot longer. If it was even possible. Chapter 4. Structural Damage. The Pierce County Jail's visiting rooms smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Eric Sherman sat across from Tony Bell, both men wearing orange jumpsuits, their previous arrogance replaced by the hollow-eyed look of men whose worlds had collapsed in a single morning. This is your fault, Eric hissed across the small table. You told me those permits were legitimate. Those permits cost me 50 grand in bribes, Bell shot back. Vernon Donaldson assured me they were ironclad. Well, Vernon's in the cell next to mine, so I'd say his assurances aren't worth much. Through the reinforced glass window, they could see other inmates in the common area. Bell, whose soft lifestyle hadn't prepared him for incarceration, flinched every time someone looked in their direction. There has to be a way out of this, Bell muttered. My lawyer says the feds have documentation going back 2 years. How is that possible? Eric's mind raced through the events of the past week. Since his arrest, he learned the full scope of his father's preparation. The trust had been ironclad, designed by Stephen Montgomery to be unbreakable. Every conversation Eric had with Bell had been recorded. Every bribe Bell had paid Vernon Donaldson had been documented. Every fraudulent document had been tracked and cataloged. My father played us, Eric admitted bitterly. He knew exactly what we were going to do, and he let us do it. Your father's just a construction worker. My father built a $40 million construction company from nothing, sold it at the perfect market peak, and has been planning this revenge for 2 years. Eric's voice carried a grudging respect he'd never felt for Roger while free. We never stood a chance. Meanwhile, back at the Sherman house, Roger stood in his workshop examining the damaged wall. The bulldozer had only penetrated about 3 feet before being stopped, and most of the damage was cosmetic. He'd have it repaired by weekend's end. Stephen Montgomery found him there, carrying a thick folder of legal documents. The prosecutor is very interested in making examples of all 3 of them, Stephen reported. Bell's company is being investigated by the IRS now, and they've found evidence of tax evasion going back 5 years. Vernon's looking at federal time for the bribery charges. And Eric? What about Eric? The trust penalties alone will bankrupt him. His debt to you now exceeds $800,000. Even if he serves minimal jail time, he'll be financially ruined for decades. Roger ran his hand along a piece of damaged wood trim. That's what he chose, Stephen. I gave him every opportunity to walk away. There's something else. Lillian called. She's flying back early from her sister's. She saw the news reports. Roger nodded. He'd been dreading this conversation. Lillian knew about the legal protections he'd put in place, but she didn't know about the deliberate trap he'd set for their son. How much does she know? Everything. The FBI contacted her as part of their investigation. She knows you've been planning this. That evening, Lillian's car pulled into the driveway just as Roger finished installing the last replacement board on the damaged wall. She emerged slowly, her face a mixture of heartbreak and something that might have been awe. 38 years of marriage, she said without preamble, and I'm still learning new things about the man I married. Roger set down his tools and faced his wife. Lil, our son is in jail, Roger. Our only child. Our son tried to steal our home and sell it for cash. He conspired with criminals and corrupt officials. He made his choice. Lillian walked past him to examine the repaired wall. You knew this would happen. You planned for it. I hope it wouldn't come to this. But yes, I planned for it. Why didn't you tell me? Roger was quiet for a long moment. Because I hoped I was wrong about Eric. And because I knew you'd try to stop me. You're right. I would have. Lillian touched the new boards, still bright compared to the weathered original siding. But I also know our son. I've watched him become someone I don't recognize. Someone greedy and cruel and willing to hurt the people who love him. She turned to face Roger, tears in her eyes. I hate that you had to do this, but I'm proud of you for protecting our home. Our life. Are you? Really? Lillian stepped close to him, placing her hand on his chest. You built this house to be our legacy, Roger. Eric tried to destroy that legacy for money. You stopped him. Yes, I'm proud of you. They stood together in the fading light, looking at their home, damaged but intact, threatened but protected. What happens now? Lillian asked. Now we see if our son learns anything from this. If he can become the man I once thought he might be. And if he can't, Roger pulled his wife close. Then at least we'll face whatever comes next together in the home we built. Inside the house, the phone was ringing. It would be more reporters, more lawyers, more complications from Eric's choices. But it would wait. For now, Roger Sherman stood with his wife in front of the house he'd built, watching the sun set over the mountains he'd looked at every day for 38 years. Some things he'd learned were worth fighting for. Chapter 5. The Foundation Holds. 2 weeks after the arrest, Roger Sherman sat in Stephen Montgomery's law office, reviewing documents that would finalize his son's complete financial ruin. The office's mahogany-paneled walls were lined with law books and legal awards, a testament to Stephen's 3 decades of legal expertise. The federal prosecutors are offering Eric a plea deal, Stephen explained, sliding a document across his desk. 5 years minimum security, full restitution of damages, and permanent forfeiture of any claim to your property. Roger studied the papers, his weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was reading. What if he refuses? Then he goes to trial for federal fraud charges, conspiracy, and destruction of protected property. He's looking at 20 years minimum, and the financial penalties would be even higher. And Bell. Stephen's smile was grim. Tony Bell's empire is collapsing. The IRS found evidence of tax evasion worth $12 million. His development company is being dissolved, and 3 other counties are investigating his previous projects. He'll be bankrupt and in prison for the next decade at minimum. Roger nodded, feeling no satisfaction from Bell's downfall. The man had chosen to prey on families like his own, and consequences were inevitable. There's something else, Stephen continued. Vernon Donaldson wants to make a deal. He's offering to testify against Bell and provide evidence of corruption in the county planning office in exchange for a reduced sentence. How many other families has he hurt with his corruption? We're finding out. The FBI has opened investigations into 17 different development projects where Vernon provided fraudulent permits. You might have done more good than you realize, Roger. Back at the Sherman house, Lillian was tending to her garden when a familiar red Mustang pulled into the driveway. Her heart clenched as she recognized Eric's car, but the man who stepped out was barely recognizable as her son. Eric had lost 20 pounds during his 2 weeks in jail. His expensive clothes had been replaced by a cheap suit provided by his public defender. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by hollow eyes and a defeated posture. "Mom," he said quietly, approaching her garden where she knelt among the roses. "Eric." Lillian's voice was carefully neutral. "You may bail. Dad posted it. I don't know why. Because despite everything, you're still our son." Eric knelt beside her in the dirt, something the old Eric would never have done in his designer clothes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Are you? Or are you sorry you got caught?" Eric was quiet for a long moment, watching his mother tend to roses that had been growing here since before he was born. "I don't know anymore. I've been so angry for so long. I can't remember why it started. When did you start seeing this house as just money instead of home?" I think it was when I graduated college. All my friends were getting high-paying jobs, buying new cars, living in downtown apartments. And I was the guy whose parents lived in an old house in the suburbs. I felt embarrassed. Lillian's hands stilled on the rose stems. Embarrassed of the home your father built with his own hands? I know how it sounds now, but yes, I wanted the kind of wealth that would make people respect me. Respect. Lillian's voice carried a sharp edge Roger would have recognized. "You thought respect came from money. Dad never went to college. He worked construction. My friends' parents were doctors, lawyers, executives. I thought I was better than this." Eric gestured at the house, the garden, the life his parents had built. "Your father built a $40 million company from nothing. He employed 300 people at its peak. He sold it to secure our retirement and spend more time with family." Lillian's voice grew harder. The only person who didn't respect Roger Sherman was his own son. Eric stared at the house he'd tried to destroy, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The careful craftsmanship in every detail. The way each room flowed naturally into the next. The workshop where his father had taught him to use tools, lessons Eric had forgotten in his pursuit of easy money. "I can't undo what I did," Eric said finally. "No, you can't. But you can choose what you do next." Roger emerged from the house, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He handed one to Lillian and set the other within Eric's reach before settling onto the porch steps. "The prosecutor offered you a plea deal," Roger said without preamble. "I know. 5 years. Are you going to take it?" Eric looked up at his father, tried to find some trace of the man who had once taught him to ride a bike, who had attended every little league game, who had built this house as a legacy for his family. "Do you want me to?" Roger was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to make the choice that lets you live with yourself, Eric. I'm done making choices for you. Dad, I need you to know I wasn't always this person. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what mattered. I know. I watched it happen. I should have stopped it sooner." "How could you have stopped it?" Roger looked at his house, his wife, his broken son. "By not giving you everything you wanted without making you earn it. By teaching you the value of hard work instead of just the value of money. By showing you that respect comes from character, not wealth." Eric picked up the glass of iced tea, his hands shaking slightly. "Is there any way back from this?" "There's always a way back," Lillian said softly. "But it starts with accepting responsibility for the damage you've caused." All of it, Roger confirmed. "The legal consequences, the financial penalties, the relationships you've broken. You take responsibility, serve your time, and then you spend the rest of your life proving you've learned from this." Eric nodded slowly. "And if I do that, then maybe someday you'll be welcome at this table again," Roger said. "But that's a long road, son, and you'll have to walk it alone." As the sun set over the mountains, 3 generations of Shermans sat in the garden Roger had planted and Lillian had tended, contemplating the long journey ahead. The house stood behind them, damaged but repaired, threatened but protected, just like the family inside it. Chapter 6. Load-bearing walls. 3 months after his arrest, Eric Sherman sat in the visitor's room of the federal courthouse, waiting for his final sentencing hearing. He'd taken the plea deal, accepting 5 years in minimum security prison and full financial restitution to his father. His court-appointed attorney, Rosa Andrade, reviewed the terms one final time. The restitution amount is final at $1.2 million. You'll be liable for that debt even after your release. I understand. Your father could have pushed for the maximum penalties, 20 years and $5 million in damages. Do you understand he chose mercy? Eric looked through the courthouse window at the Portland skyline, thinking about the conversation that had led to this moment. 2 weeks ago, Roger had visited him in jail, their first private conversation since the arrest. "Dad came to see me," Eric said to Rosa. "He told me something I didn't expect." The memory was clear. Roger sitting across from him in the jail's visiting room, looking older than Eric remembered, but with the same steady gaze that had once made Eric feel safe as a child. "I'm not here to gloat," Roger had said simply. "Then why are you here?" "To tell you that I'm proud of you for taking the plea deal. It's the first responsible choice you've made in years." Eric had stared at his father, confused. "Proud? I tried to steal your house." "Yes, you did. And you're facing the consequences. That takes courage, even if it's courage you should have found sooner. The prosecutors wanted to make an example of me. You could have let them." Roger's expression had softened slightly. "You're my son, Eric. I set a trap for you because I hoped you'd be smart enough not to walk into it. You weren't. But that doesn't mean I want to see you destroyed. What do you want? I want you to serve your time, pay your debt, and figure out who you want to be when this is over. The man who tried to sell his family's legacy for money? Or someone better?" Now, sitting in the courthouse, Eric understood the gift his father had given him. Not just the reduced sentence, but the possibility of redemption. "Ms. Andrade," Eric said, "I want to make a statement to the court." "That's not necessary. The plea agreement." "I know, but I need to say this." An hour later, Eric stood before Judge Alberto Sutton, a stern man in his 60s who had seen enough fraud cases to know the difference between genuine remorse and calculated performance. "Mr. Sherman, you've accepted a plea agreement that will result in a 5-year sentence and significant financial penalties. Before I accept this agreement, do you have anything you wish to say to the court?" Eric looked back at the gallery where Roger and Lillian sat in the front row. Stephen Montgomery was there too, along with several FBI agents who had worked the case. "Your Honor, I want to plead guilty not just to the legal charges, but to something the law can't prosecute, betraying my family's trust. My father built our family home with his own hands, intending it to be a legacy for future generations. I try to destroy that legacy for money." Judge Sutton studied Eric's face. "Continue. The prosecutors have portrayed my father as the victim in this case, but that's not complete. My father is a hero. He protected not just his own property, but exposed a network of corruption that was harming families throughout this county. My actions gave him the evidence needed to stop it." "You're claiming credit for your father's investigation?" "No, Your Honor. I'm accepting responsibility for being the criminal who walked into his trap. My father spent 2 years preparing for what I would do because he knew me better than I knew myself. He knew I had become someone who would steal from his own family." Eric's voice grew stronger. "I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for the chance to spend the next 5 years becoming worthy of the family name I've dishonored." Judge Sutton was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Sherman, I presided over hundreds of fraud cases. Most defendants express remorse only for getting caught. You seem to understand the broader implications of your actions. I understand that I became everything my father raised me not to be. And I understand that fixing that is my responsibility, not his." "Very well. This court accepts your plea agreement. 5 years in federal minimum security facility, $1.2 million in restitution, and 3 years supervised probation upon release." The gavel fell with finality. After the hearing, Eric was allowed a brief conversation with his parents before beginning his sentence. 5 years is a long time, Lillian said, tears in her eyes. It's not nearly long enough to undo the damage I've caused, Eric replied. But it's enough time to figure out how to be the better man. Roger extended his hand to his son, the first physical contact they'd had since the arrest. Eric shook it, feeling the calluses that represented decades of honest work. The house will be here when you get out, Roger said simply. I don't expect. The house will be here, Roger repeated. What you do to earn your place in it again is up to you. As federal marshals led Eric away to begin his sentence, Roger and Lillian stood together in the courthouse corridor. Do you think he's really changed? Lillian asked. I think he started to change. Whether he finishes the job depends on choices he'll make when no one's watching. And the others? Roger smiled grimly. Tony Bell was sentenced yesterday. 15 years in total financial ruin. Vernon Donaldson got 7 years in forfeiture of his pension. The corruption network they were part of is finished. They walked out of the courthouse together, heading home to the house that had started this entire chain of events. Behind them, the wheels of justice continued to turn, but the Sherman family's part in this story was entering a new chapter. One that would be written over the next 5 years, one day at a time. Chapter 7, Breaking Point. Year 4 of Eric's sentence found him in the prison library, surrounded by construction textbooks and architectural manuals. The federal minimum security facility in Sheridan, Oregon, had become an unexpected place of education for the man who had once scorned his father's profession. Sherman, you have a visitor, announced Perry Baird, the guard who had watched Eric transform from an arrogant criminal into something resembling a student. Eric looked up from his study of load-bearing structures, an irony not lost on him, and was surprised to see Stephen Montgomery waiting in the visiting room. Mr. Montgomery, I wasn't expecting you. Stephen settled into the plastic chair across from Eric, his usual legal confidence replaced by something more personal. Your father didn't send me, if that's what you're wondering. I'm here on my own. Why? Because there's something you need to know, and Roger's too proud to tell you himself. Stephen pulled out a manila folder. Your father's been paying your restitution debt. Eric's blood chilled. What? Every month for the past 4 years. The full amount due, plus interest. Your debt to him is nearly paid off. That's impossible. The payments are over $20,000 a month. Dad doesn't have that kind of money. Stephen's expression grew grave. He does now. Roger came out of retirement and started a new construction company. He's been working 70-hour weeks for 4 years, building custom homes for wealthy clients, all to pay off your debt. The folder contained photographs. Roger on construction sites, looking older and more weathered than Eric remembered. Roger in his workshop late at night, designing custom cabinetry. Roger and Lillian at their kitchen table, surrounded by financial documents and invoices. He's killing himself to clean up my mess, Eric whispered. At 66 years old, your father's doing the hardest physical work of his life because he refuses to let his son emerge from prison as a bankrupt man. Eric stared at the photos, seeing his parents' sacrifice laid out in stark detail. Why would he do this? Because he still believes you could be redeemed, and because he wants you to have a chance at a real life when you get out. I have to stop him. I need to call. He won't take your calls about this. I try to convince him to slow down, to let the debt ride. He won't listen. Eric stood abruptly, pacing the small visiting room. There has to be something I can do. Stephen reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second folder. Actually, there is. The federal government has a work release program for inmates with specialized skills. You could qualify to work on construction projects outside the prison during your final year. Construction? I don't know anything about construction. You've been studying it for 4 years. You have an engineering degree. And according to the prison's education coordinator, you've scored in the top percentile on every construction and architectural exam they've given. Eric sat back down, his mind racing. If I could earn money, real money, I could pay off the debt myself. More than that, there's a specific project that needs someone with your combination of education and emerging skills. Stephen pulled out architectural plans. The county is building a new community center on the site where Tony Bell's last development was supposed to go. They need someone who understands both the engineering and the legal complications of the property. Eric studied the plans, recognizing the address immediately. This is where Belle was going to build after he destroyed our house. Ironic, isn't it? The site where your conspiracy was supposed to culminate is now becoming a public benefit, and you could be the one to make it happen. Why would they trust me? I'm a convicted felon. Because the project coordinator specifically requested you. Eric looked up sharply. Who? Stephen smiled for the first time during the visit. Jake Rogers, your father's old foreman. He's running the construction, and he says any son of Roger Sherman who spent 4 years studying construction theory is worth a chance. That evening, Eric called his parents for the first time in 6 months. Lillian answered, her voice warm despite the years of separation. Eric, how are you, sweetheart? Mom, I need to talk to Dad about the restitution payments. Hold on. There was a pause, muffled conversation, then Roger's voice came on the line. Eric, Dad, Stephen told me what you've been doing. The extra work, the payments. Stephen had no right to tell you that. Yes, he did. Dad, you're killing yourself to clean up my mess. I'm taking care of my family. That's what fathers do. Eric closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 4 years' worth of consequences crashing down on him. Dad, there's a work release program. I could earn money, pay off the debt myself. You focus on your studies and your rehabilitation. The money will take care of itself. I won't let you destroy your health for my mistakes. Roger was quiet for a long moment. Eric, I've been waiting 4 years to hear you say something like that. What do you mean? You just put my welfare ahead of your own convenience. That's the first time since you were 12 years old. Eric felt tears he'd been holding back for months finally break through. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. I know you are, son, and I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Am I? Becoming that man? Stephen says you've been studying construction for 4 years. Is that true? Yes. I wanted to understand what I tried to destroy, and I wanted to understand the work that built our family. Then yes, Eric, you're becoming the man I always hoped you'd be. After the call ended, Eric sat in his cell, staring at the construction textbooks that had become his constant companions. Tomorrow, he would apply for the work release program, not just to pay off his debt, but to prove he was worthy of the sacrifice his father had made for him. The breaking point had finally come. But instead of breaking Eric, it had revealed the foundation of character that had been buried under years of entitlement and greed. Now, he had 11 months to build something worthy on that foundation. Chapter 8. Reconstruction. The summer sun beat down on the construction site as Eric Sherman drove the final bolt into the community center's main beam. After 8 months in the work release program, his hands had developed the same calluses his father wore, and his shoulders had broadened from daily physical labor. Looking good, Sherman, called Jake Rogers from across the site. At 55, Jake still moved with the efficiency of a master craftsman, and his approval had become something Eric valued more than any praise he'd received in his previous life. Thanks, Jake. The electrical contractors want to walk through this afternoon to plan their runs. Good. We're actually ahead of schedule. Jake approached, wiping sweat from his brow. Your dad would be proud of this work. Eric looked up at the building taking shape around them. The community center would serve families throughout the county. Families like his own, who needed a place to gather, to build connections, to create the kind of memories Eric had tried to sell. Jake, can I ask you something? Shoot. Why did you recommend me for this job? After everything I did. Jake set down his tools and leaned against a nearby sawhorse. Because I worked for your father for 15 years. I watched him build this family business from nothing. And I watched you grow up. You watched me become a criminal. I watched you become lost. There's a difference. Jake's expression grew serious. Your father could have destroyed you completely, Eric. Instead, he gave you exactly what you needed. Consequences that would either break you or fix you. And which did they do? Jake gestured around the construction site. You tell me. The Eric I knew 5 years ago would never have spent 8 months doing manual labor to pay off a debt he could have let ride. That evening, Eric returned to the halfway house where he spent his non-working hours. The facility was basic but clean, housing federal inmates in their final months of supervised release. His roommate, Clinton Crawford, was a white-collar criminal serving time for insider trading. Sherman, You've got mail, Clinton said, tossing an envelope onto Eric's bunk. Eric recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. Inside was a photograph. Roger and Lillian standing in front of their house. But the image showed something new. A small addition had been built onto the eastern side, exactly where the bulldozer had damaged the original structure. Lillian's note was brief. Your father finally built the sunroom I've been wanting for 20 years. He says he had some extra money from his consulting work. We know better. Love, Mom. Eric studied the photo, seeing how seamlessly the addition blended with the original architecture. Even when expanding the house, Roger had maintained the integrity of his original design. The next morning brought unexpected news. Stephen Montgomery arrived at the construction site with paperwork and an expression Eric couldn't read. Stephen, is everything okay? More than okay. I have news. First, as of today, your restitution debt is paid in full. Eric set down his hammer, stunned. Already, your work release earnings, combined with your father's payments, have satisfied the complete obligation. You're financially clear. And second, Stephen smiled. The county is so impressed with this project that they're offering you a full-time position when your sentence ends next month. Project coordinator for municipal construction. It comes with a full salary, benefits, and the chance to rebuild the community that was damaged by your previous actions. Eric looked around the construction site. His work, his crew, his chance at redemption made tangible. There's one condition, Stephen continued. What? You have to pass the state contractor's licensing exam. Jake's been preparing you, but it's not an easy test. When do I take it? 2 weeks from today. If you pass, the job is yours. If you fail, Stephen shrugged. I'll pass, Eric said with a confidence he'd never felt about anything related to construction. 2 weeks later, Eric sat in the state licensing office, working through the most comprehensive exam of his life. The test covered everything from structural engineering to safety regulations to business law, all subjects he'd been studying for 4 years. When he finished, the proctor reviewed his answers with the efficiency of someone who'd seen thousands of hopeful contractors fail. Mr. Sherman, the proctor said finally, congratulations. You've passed with a score of 94%. That evening, Eric made the call he'd been anticipating for 5 years. Dad, it's Eric. I'm coming home. Roger's voice was steady, but Eric could hear the emotion underneath. When? Tomorrow. My sentence is complete, and I've got a job offer here in town. If you'll have me, I'd like to come to dinner Sunday. Your place at the table has been waiting for you, son. Dad, I love you, and I'm proud to be your son. I love you too, Eric. Welcome home. The next morning, Eric walked out of the federal facility carrying a single duffel bag containing everything he owned. His red Mustang had been sold years ago to pay legal fees, but Jake Rogers was waiting with his pickup truck. Ready to see what you've been working toward? Jake asked. More than ready. They drove through Portland's familiar streets, but Eric saw them differently now. These weren't obstacles to his ambitions. They were the community he would help build, maintain, and protect. When they pulled into the Sherman driveway, Eric saw his parents waiting on the front porch. Roger looked older, his hair completely silver now, but his posture was still strong. Lillian had tears in her eyes. The house behind them was exactly as Eric remembered, except for the beautiful sunroom addition that perfectly complemented the original architecture. Welcome home, son, Roger said, extending his hand. Eric shook it, feeling the calluses that matched his own now. Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad. Family doesn't give up on family. That's the lesson I should have taught you 20 years ago. As they walked toward the house together, Eric noticed something new mounted beside the front door. A small plaque reading Sherman Construction, IST 1985, Legacy Builders. What's that? Eric asked. Roger smiled. That's our new family business. If you're interested in joining it. Eric looked at the house his father had built, the family that had waited for him, and the future he'd finally earned. Yes, sir. I'm very interested. Chapter 9, Legacy Builders. 1 year later, Eric Sherman stood on a ladder, installing the final piece of crown molding in what would become the Lillian Sherman Community Arts Center. The building had been the county's most ambitious project to date, and Eric had served as both project coordinator and general contractor. "Eric, come down from there," called Lillian from the center of the main hall. "The dedication ceremony starts in an hour, and you're still covered in sawdust." Eric climbed down and surveyed the completed space. The Arts Center featured soaring ceilings, natural lighting, and craftsmanship that rivaled anything his father had ever built. More importantly, it had been constructed entirely by Sherman Construction's crew, a business that now employed 23 people and had a waiting list of clients. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Lillian said, her eyes bright with pride. "Your father taught you well. We taught each other." Eric looked around the space that would soon host community theater, art classes, and events for families throughout the county. "This is what I should have been building all along." Roger emerged from the back offices, wearing the same tool belt he'd worn for 40 years, but moving with the satisfaction of a man who'd completed his life's work. "The final inspection passed," he announced. "We're officially ready for the ceremony." "Dad, I need to tell you something before everyone gets here." Roger's eyebrows raised. "What's that?" Eric pulled a folded document from his shirt pocket. "I've been working with Stephen Montgomery on something. A trust document that puts this building and all of Sherman Construction's community projects under permanent protection." "What kind of protection?" "The same kind you put on our house. Legal guarantees that these buildings can never be sold to developers, never be demolished for profit, never be turned into anything other than what they were built to be." Roger took the document, reading through the legal language with the careful attention he'd learned to pay to contracts. "Eric, this ties up millions of dollars in assets. You're giving up significant future wealth." "No, Dad. I'm ensuring that the wealth we create serves the community instead of just ourselves. That's what legacy really means." Lillian wiped away tears as she watched her husband and son, two men who'd nearly lost each other to greed and pride, standing together over a plan to give away their profits for the greater good. "There's something else," Eric continued. "I want to make you a full partner in Sherman Construction. Equal ownership, equal decision-making. Eric, you've built this business. We built this business. And I want to make sure that everything we build from now on reflects the values you taught me." Roger looked at his son, no longer the entitled young man who tried to sell the family home, but a craftsman, a leader, a man who understood the difference between price and value. "Okay, son, partners." They shook hands as the first guests began arriving for the dedication ceremony. The crowd that gathered was a cross-section of Portland society, county officials, business leaders, families who had used the center, and construction workers who'd built it. But Eric's attention was focused on a small group near the front. Tony Bell was notably absent, still serving his 15-year sentence in federal prison. But Vernon Donaldson had been released 6 months earlier, his pension forfeited and his career in ruins. He stood at the back of the crowd, looking older and somehow smaller than Eric remembered. After the ribbon cutting and speeches, Vernon approached Eric hesitantly. "Mr. Sherman, I wanted to speak with you." Eric studied the man who'd helped orchestrate the attack on his family. Vernon's expensive suit had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing, and his formerly arrogant demeanor was gone. "What do you want, Vernon?" "I wanted to apologize, and to ask if there might be work for someone like me." "Work?" "I'm trained as a building inspector. I know codes, regulations, safety protocols. I thought maybe—" Vernon's voice trailed off. Eric considered the request. The old Eric would have either dismissed Vernon immediately or tried to exploit his desperation. But the new Eric understood something about redemption and second chances. "We don't need a building inspector," Eric said finally. "But we do need someone to coordinate our compliance documentation. It's detail work, not exciting, and it pays about a third of what you used to make." Vernon's face lit up with something that might have been hope. "I'll take it. The job comes with conditions. You work under direct supervision. You report any pressure from developers or officials to compromise standards. And you spend 20 hours a month volunteering for community projects." "I accept." Eric shook Vernon's hand, knowing that this moment, offering redemption to someone who'd tried to destroy his family, was perhaps the clearest sign of how far he'd traveled from the man he used to be. As the ceremony wound down, Eric found himself standing with his parents in the main hall of the Arts Center, watching families explore the space that would become a centerpiece of their community. Do you ever regret it? Lillian asked. The path that brought us here? Eric considered the question seriously. I regret the pain I caused you both. I regret the time we lost. But I don't regret learning the difference between building something and just accumulating money. Roger nodded toward a group of children who were already planning art projects for the center studios. This is what legacy looks like, Eric. Not bank accounts or property values, but the foundation you provide for other people to build their lives on. I understand that now. Do you? Really? Eric looked around the arts center, built with his hands, designed with his newfound skills, protected by legal structures he'd created to ensure it would serve the community forever. Yes, Dad, I understand. As they walked out together, Eric noticed the plaque by the main entrance. Lillian Sherman Community Arts Center, built by Sherman Construction, Legacy Builders. Below that, in smaller text, dedicated to the principle that true wealth is measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we create for others. Roger had insisted on that inscription, and Eric had readily agreed. They were legacy builders now, all three of them. Not just of buildings, but of the kind of community where families could grow and thrive without fear that greed would destroy what they'd built. The red Mustang was gone, sold long ago to pay for Eric's mistakes. In its place, Eric drove a work truck with Sherman Construction's logo on the side. It wasn't as flashy, but it carried the tools he needed to build the life he'd finally learned to value. As they drove home through the streets they'd helped improve, past the community center they'd built, toward the house that had started it all, Eric realized that his father's greatest construction project hadn't been any building. It had been the reconstruction of his son, and that legacy would last forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.